Hi, Kens.
Hi, Ingrid.
How you doing?
Fabulous on this lovely Wednesday.
Woohoo! So we have gotten some great responses from folks that we know who are subscribing to the channel and who are asking questions. And so you and I have created this channel to be able to answer questions. So please like and subscribe to
That's
the
right.
channel, share it with friends. And feel free to ask questions that you have about American state nationals, about what's going on, about anything that we're talking about multidimensionality, um, about anything related to stuff that we've mentioned that we're going to talk about. Um, and if we can answer those questions, we will. And if we can't, we'll do our best shot to point you in the right direction. So Kenzie and I were talking a teeny bit before we started recording, and we had wanted to talk about Kenzie thought it was a good idea if we talk about power of attorney. And I would love for that to happen. At the same time, I'm thinking, well, what comes before that? Are folks have found this channel, like you said, you were saying, people have found our channel because they're interested and curious. They're interested in freedom. They're curious about freedom. They know something's not right, or they wouldn't have found us.
Right.
And so that being said, there's a whole lot of directions that we can go in. And so as you all ask your questions, that will help us figure out how to address them when we come on in the future. But for today, is there anything that you can think of in terms of, just simple things like jurisdiction? What's jurisdiction? Why is this coming up now? What are we talking about? What's an American state national? Is that different than being a US citizen? Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, how do you want to start this?
Well, like you said, people are recognizing that something is very off. The principles of freedom and being sovereign have been really, I think, held. We've been seeing all of those concepts that are relating to it. And because here we are in America, you and I, the way that we grew up believing in the principles of our founding fathers, what we were taught in school, my family history, my mom is an Allen. We come from Ethan Allen. That's the light a revolutionary war spirit that was all about being self-governing. And so, all of these things that we grew up believing in as Americans and having pride for what our forefathers had who have gone before us have established and wanting to preserve that. But I think pretty much all of us saw during the COVID era that the way that the world was behaving, the way that America was behaving was in absolute contrast with those principles. And so that was what made us begin to start questioning, wait a minute.
Yeah,
That's, listening to the government telling you how you could go about your business, listening to the government decide for you if your business could be running, having your employer insisting that you take mandated medicine, regardless of the fact that maybe you're a holistic person, maybe you're a practitioner of, you know, herbal medicine without any regard for any of the principles of freedom and self-governance and sovereignty, which is what we're supposed to be standing on. I think that really woke people up to the fact that something is not right. This
yeah.
is not how it is supposed to be.
This was really when it's how I ended up coming onto land and soil. Because for me, when folks started talking about, worldwide conversation, talking about getting rid of the Nuremberg Code, I was just like, wait, what?
Mhm.
Uh,
Right.
like stuff was not right up until that point, but that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me, where I was like, are you nuts? Are you nuts? Does that not, and that was where divides started happening in families
Mhm.
and among friends. Um, People just were, the idea, I think the idea of the fear mongering, right? You've talked before about hypnotic language, the fear mongering that was taking place, the reactionary place. I was just like, holy crap, my parents lived through Nazi Germany, and I'm about to go through it in America in 2020. Like that,
Whoa.
all of my, and coming from German immigrants, first generation American, um as a kid, having, people say to me, like, what were the German people thinking? Why couldn't they speak up? Why couldn't they do something? Like, the irony of friends and family who believe in freedom and believe in love and caring and looking out for one another, the spin that that took, what it meant to love and care and look out for one another, meant one very narrow thing. And if you didn't follow suit with that one very narrow thing, then you were trying to kill people and you were a horrible human being. That for me,
Right.
like in retrospect, even though I feel like I've healed from the immediate PTSD, I think there's some residual there. The gulf that that caused between people who are so close to me has not been healed. It has not been healed. And even though I feel like I have come around that to a certain extent because of my spiritual beliefs, because of my spiritual practices, because ultimately I feel like it doesn't actually matter what you decide to do. What matters is your intention. And
Mhm.
and if you are doing things from an open, loving heart, it's very different from doing things from a place of fear and being controlled and wanting to be accepted, wanting to keep your job. And so doing things that internally are not right. Now, it's one thing if you feel something is absolutely right to do that for yourself, but to expect other people to ignore what they feel like is right for them. This is where we get into the muck, right?
Yep. Yep.
Around mandates,
Yep.
um, around who has to follow mandates and why, and that having to do with jurisdiction.
Yep.
And so,
Yeah.
in addition to all of the things that, as a sign language interpreter who was hearing on the news how packed hospitals were, emergency rooms were, nobody could get, people were ill, it was everywhere. And every hospital I was going to, because I was working, I was going to hospitals. There was nobody there.
Yeah.
There was like no, they were like, I was like walking down halls going, hello,
Yeah.
hello. Like, I wasn't finding that. And then medical professionals who I know or who I work with were saying to me, "Oh, this is all going to blow over. This is a teeny bit of insanity, but like my
Mhm.
family's not masking, my family's not worried about it. This is just a little insanity. Just, hold your own, hold your own." And then to have that, just to have those people be fired or gotten rid of.
Yeah, the ones that had the common sense rather than the people that jumped on the fear bandwagon and allowed whatever was being told to them by essentially the people that had abdicated their own personal authority. And I wanna add too that authority, personal authority, that's agency, and responsibility is a huge component of that. And so when people abdicate their responsibility to make decisions for themselves, their responsibility to think for themselves, and they put it off on someone else, that's an abdication not only of your sovereignty, of your personal power, but it's also your responsibility that you're giving up. And so there's so much embedded within that. And yes, a lot of the reason that it works so well was through the use of hypnotic programming. And as a hypnotist, I am now able to see that. Whereas I was living through it, wondering, looking around me, because it didn't work for me. But I was watching all of these people that I thought had common sense bowing down to this crazy fear porn narrative and truly believing it. And so, yes, it really was there has been mind control that has been levied against the population, absolutely, and it's in a number of ways, and we're gonna be talking about a lot of that as we roll out with this channel and we talk more, but let me also say that what you touched upon, the trauma, there is so much collective trauma that is out there now that we are all dealing with, including people that continue to choose to not see any of the cognitive dissonance that's going on, continuing to follow the news and all of the same parties that pushed and controlled and kept everyone in fear. They're continuing to buy into that by choice. It's an unconscious
And
choice.
this is
However,
it's consciousness, it's a consciousness development, and
it
so
is.
I wanna stress, right? I wanna stress, I think that there's a subtlety here that you and I start to diverge on, and it's okay. It's totally fine. It's a cool divergence, in the sense that it's when I say it's a consciousness, a developmental consciousness, an indication of where someone is at in terms of their consciousness. Not to say one is better than the other, but if there is something in your consciousness that you can't, it's not, there's a block. You can't see it. It's because you're not ready to see it, right? I remember years and years ago hearing stories of when Columbus's ships came to the Americas, the natives, right, the indigenous people couldn't see the larger ships. It was only when and there was someone had said something to the effect of this is in Columbus's diary, which I have not read. Okay, I have not read it. But the way that it was described in multiple places through multiple people that I've heard it from multiple people, that it wasn't until they got into the smaller rowboats to come ashore that the indigenous folks could see them. And so from the native perspective, it looked like they sort of just came out of nowhere. And so there was a consciousness level around the size of the technology and what that technology was, the larger ships that wasn't in existence, it wasn't in play for the natives. Um, this has also been described by anthropologists who have gone into um, interact with tribes who are not on the larger scene. They're not larger cultures. They're indigenous tribes that are living in the woods, that are living independently, that are largely unknown. When they first are interacting, they can't entirely see the video cameras or the cameras. They see something, but there's a distortion because it's not within their consciousness to see it. It requires an explanation and working through the consciousness barrier to be able to see those things. So, in this same way, we developmentally are not seeing a lot of the things around us. It's why lots of people can't see entities and can't see consciousnesses in higher dimensional realities if they're not primed to be able to see them. So, in terms of COVID and in terms of belief systems, if you truly believe that the TV and the newscasters and the medical professionals who are doing dances, by the way, and not working on people in the ER, but doing dances for you, to tell you to put your mask on, but then in 2 days later tell you to take the mask off, that it's not helpful, and then tell you to put the mask back on, and then tell you to take it off. the back and forth on that for me was like, did that not shake people out of that level of consciousness? It didn't for many people because so much fear was triggered that they couldn't. Okay.
But
So
that's artificial, Ingrid. Fear is an artificial reality. It is not a natural state of the true organic human. And so when outside forces are working on you to keep you there, it is our responsibility to recognize that our nervous system is under attack and to do whatever we need to do by going within and reclaiming our power, reflecting, doing exercises, because there are a lot. This is a really interesting principle, that more and more neurolinguistic programming folks are recognizing, is that physiology controls psychology. And so it really is a matter of getting into your body and doing whatever movements you need to, because movements actually do break that. It's kinda like if you think about being triggered, think about it as an electric current. The amygdala is firing, it's receiving this stimulation, it's flowing as a current. If you do a body movement such as you shift your eyes to the right and the left, and you keep doing it, that essentially breaks that current, and so that firing is no longer happening, and so, again, it's our responsibility, and
if you've been
sometimes it's
taught
a
that
matter of
and
that.
you
It's
know
not
that,
even consciousness. It's not even consciousness. Like, yeah, I get what you're saying and I agree with you mostly, but w people can automatically, by doing these things, break that pattern and take back their own awareness. And so I think that we need to, part of maybe why we're here is to help people to see that, yes, you can do that. It's just a matter of recognizing that you're being triggered, and that it's kinda like when you put your hand out and you grab a live wire and and you're just frying away, you have to come away from that. And in EMS, which I had an EMT cert for over 10 years. I used to be a teaching assistant for people that were new to EMS. That's called, essentially, you got to stop the bleeding. You got to remove the danger. So you have to physically break whatever is creating that danger so that you can come back to yourself. Because when emotions take over, the rational brain shuts down. You are not in control. So you must first take back control. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying. Think about the speed record for runners, and how up until
yes,
the 1970s or something, and I don't know the details, I just know the story, and how all of a sudden this runner managed to exceed whatever that barrier was, that up to that point nobody could seem to get over it. And once that person did it, then just look at all the things that humans are possible.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
the 3-minute mile or the 4-minute mile.
Yeah, that whole story. But see, that shows how, when someone is able to overcome some kind of a barrier that's artificial, that's been imposed, and then it becomes accepted by the masses as, oh, that's how it is. But then somebody
100th
knows.
monkey,
Yeah.
the 100th monkey theory.
And so it is like a constant evolution of consciousness. And the more
Yeah.
people are aware and they begin to see things by going within and taking back their authority and their responsibility for themselves, the more that is uplifting others. And so, yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's super helpful at this moment for more and more people to learn about jurisdiction, and
Yes.
for more and more people to learn about the coup of 1871, and for more and more people to learn about the idea that there have been two countries, though one of them is not a country, it's a corporation, running simultaneously all this time. And what has happened in the history of the country that we are in, what has happened. And so, what we can say from that, because we did want to talk briefly about power of attorney, is that there is something called, there's lots of YouTube videos about it. You can look it up. The birth certificate scam. It's called a lot of things.
Yeah.
And basically, what that did was take you who were born naturally on the land and soil It took you off the land and soil jurisdiction, brought you through the water jurisdiction into um, the air jurisdiction. So, can you briefly explain what how that functions or how that works to be able to talk about as that has happened to you and you've been living your life? Basically, what happened was the state took ownership of you. The
Yeah,
government took ownership of you. The corporation took ownership of all of us that have had our parents sign our birth, our mothers sign our birth certificates.
yeah,
And they took essentially power of attorney,
right, and so your mother essentially signed a contract with the state abandoning you on paper. And so what ends up happening with that birth certificate is that it then becomes recorded. It becomes part of public record. And the bans get published, and this goes back to a really older practice whereby a public record has been announced. The public record being announced through the newspaper announcing the birth of baby so and so, baby Hannah. Well, anyone who wishes to claim rights over baby Hannah needs to do so within a certain amount of time. And if they don't do it, they're considered abandoned. And so that's essentially what has been happening. And so when the birth certificate gets recorded, that is essentially when the notice begins and the clock is ticking. Because people are not aware that this is the process and that you've essentially gone into contract law and your parents have given up the rights of their children essentially to the state.
which
The
is why the
state
state can take them away,
the state then and that activates the principles of parens patriae, which if I used to be a manager for the Department of Children and Families in Massachusetts. That is the fundamental uh, reason, the legal framework behind which the state can come in and claim that they have superior right to the child because this child is a ward of the state under parens patriae. Therefore, the state is the overarching authority that supersedes parental rights. And so anyone who has done this, that's why DCF can come into your house essentially. It's parens patriae. Because of the whole process, your mother voluntarily entered into a contract giving you up. Kind of like when you register your car, you are essentially giving up your ownership of your asset to the state, and they are loaning you back the privilege of driving it. And so it's a huge, I mean, contract is behind everything. That is the water jurisdiction. That
it
is the
touches
jurisdiction.
every part of our lives,
Right,
every
and right. And so what then happens with that birth certificate, just to continue the progression, is then after it gets recorded, it goes into the national database and bonds are created in the name of this child. A social security number is assigned. All of these things are contracts. And so from that point on, this child is essentially a commodity that's being use prof these corporations, because every government is a corporation. And also I want to say that if you take our state, Massachusetts, for instance, it is not just one corporation, the Commonwealth of Mass, the state of Mass. It is multiple different corporations. The Secretary of State, William Galvin, has multiple different iterations of the office of the Secretary of State and himself as the CEO.
and
And
so where can you go to see that where can you go to see this?
well, you have to do some digging. You
Mm.
have to look on Dun& and Bradstreet. Now, if people wanna look in the about information about this channel, I linked a video that I had made a couple years ago. Yes, I'm sorry, there's a horrifically ugly and treacherous looking clown as the thumbnail. Please just get past that. It's a short video, it's 7 minutes. And there are a lot of these points that are laid out more in a visual form without us talking that can be very helpful. But Dun& and Bradstreet was the old corporation's database. And you can, by doing some digging, you can identify. It's not just the Secretary of State. Every single department, every single agency, every single municipal, state and town, every single department within all of these entities They're all separately incorporated with a separate Dun& and Bradstreet number. So it's an enormous web, and then think about the Fed and all of those agencies. Everything is just this massive, massive spider web overlay of multiple different processes
A
and moving
rat's nest.
pieces.
It's a rat's nest. It doesn't
It
have
really is. It's
doesn't make
horrendous.
sense.
Yeah, it's horrendous, and it's very complicated, I don't mean to try to oversimplify, but when you're starting to get exposed to what's really been going on, you have to start somewhere, essentially, and it really began with, we are no longer state nationals. We are no longer considered living men and women. We have been essentially given up on paper. And also, I also want to add that but the physical action in this world that we're living in, which kind of seals that deal, is when a baby's born in a hospital, the placenta gets taken away. Well, that placenta is actually the evidence that this is, and it's considered symbolic of the body of that child. And you leave that behind at the hospital. And so, not only have you signed it on paper with the birth certificate, but you've also relinquished the placenta and given up the DNA. So you have done it not only in word, but also in deed. And so that begins the process. And from that moment on, people are essentially wards of the state. Even when we grow up and we become adults, guess what? We don't even know it. We are operating as instruments, as corporations ourselves. If you think about contract law, there are multiple different requirements to enter into a valid contract, and one of them is that only like entities may contract with each other. So, your mother is also a corporation, also a an entity, because it all goes back, and
She never
contracts are
rescinded the
entered into
contract.
by, right, and so when we're signing our name on a contract for anything from that point on, we are operating as a corporation. So again, every action that we take is further locking in our voluntariness for participating in the system. So
Mm.
it's very deep, it's treacherous, and there's a lot of work that it takes for people to understand. I know, I still understand, comprehend. It
Overstand.
overstand. It requires a lot of digging and a lot of soul searching and a lot of reflecting, and oftentimes a lot of conversations, because it's so deep and it's so wide that it's crazy. But you have to think about it in terms of a lattice. And so each action adds weight and strength to what's existing. And when we get to this point of where we're adults, we've got multiple years of contracts that we've entered into, multiple places where we have agreed, multiple places where we haven't stood up and said, no, we don't consent to that. And the whole process of becoming a state national is when you start to take your power back and you start to do that by saying, no, I don't consent to that.
Mm.
This is not, I can relinquish. I no longer declare all of that valid. I am taking back my power, and I don't choose to be a corporate citizen.
Right. The critical difference between what Kenzie and I are talking about, what Kenzie's been saying, and what we're trying to bring forward to you all is that it's more than just saying you believe yourself to be or you claim your sovereignty. The idea of being a sovereign citizen, what that means. It's not just something that you can say. You have to, because of all of the contracts that have been created throughout your life, contract has to be used to get out of that, or
Right,
out from underneath those contracts.
right, right, right. Because think about it also in that jurisdiction, their language is contract. And so, in order for them to recognize you and have no choice but to abide by your declaration, it has to be in the language that they understand, which is the written language. And so, contracts got you in, contracts must get you out. I'm not saying there aren't people out there that have been for years operating as sovereign and they have abdicated all of this stuff. And once you give up your social security number, by the way, that's the ultimate. reclamation of sovereignty. However, because our lives have gotten so bound that there are things that we are not secure enough and we don't have enough infrastructure on an individual basis to be able to take that step yet. But at some point down the road, it is my belief and it's my goal that we will get there. As of right now, you do that, no police will touch you, no court will waste their time with you. None of these enforcements could possibly happen because there would be nothing for them to attach, because realize that that social security number is what is the revenue. That's what enables the revenue stream that they use to make money off of you. Whenever a police officer writes a ticket to you, well, guess what? That's a contract that's just
Bond
been
gets
created and there's money coming to them.
a
So
bond gets created.
right,
Yes.
right. So if you take away that, then they can't make money on you, and they're not gonna waste their time with you. But again, we are not, as a society, even as a group of individuals, many of us ready to go that far yet. And so we have to get ourselves to that point. And all of this didn't happen overnight. So it's a gradual unraveling. As things became bound, they must become unbound. And so that's why it's not a simple thing. Some people can talk very well and they know where they stand and they're able to argue their case when they're out in public. They don't lose their head. But for many people, they're not that confident. And because it is so incredibly complicated what has been done, and the incredible depth and breadth of the fraud, it's a difficult thing to think that you're going to be able to stand on word alone and on principle and on ideology. So therefore, that's why we're saying that's part of the assembly practice. It's recognizing that people are not super confident, recognizing that people need to all basically walk each other home, and that we're within a structure of support. And part of that is the recognition that, yes, you do need to do paperwork. You need to put your declaration in writing.
And it's a structure of support that is recognized by the jurisdictions that have created the fraud and that survive and profit off the fraud. They have to recognize the jurisdiction of land and soil because it's older, because it came first.
Because it created them.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Right.
So,
The created can never exceed the creator.
yeah.
And they don't even realize that in trying and hoping that we will all go away and stamp us out, they essentially invalidate themselves. Land and soil was supposed to always be the system of checks and balances, holding in check our contractors. We created their ability to do tasks for us. That was the constitutions. A constitution is a compact, aka contract. So they were given specific enumerated tasks to do for us, and we were always supposed to be holding them in check as their employers. However, because so much has been deliberately put out there to distract us, to make us forget, and then in schools, they teach us their corporate political system. If you think about it, they teach us that there are three jurisdictions, or there are um, three
Branches.
branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. Well, that's three branches of their government, which is literally democracy. That is corporate law. That is the Roman Senate. That is the majority rules. The Republican form of government, which is land and soil, which is the natural law, the natural order, the creator jurisdiction. Every person has equal say with everything. And that it is all about self-governance and recognizing your sovereign rights. You might be the only person that is standing on a particular concept, a particular action. And as long as you are not infringing upon someone else's rights, causing harm, because that is where your responsibility, extends. And we are responsible to ourselves, and we are responsible to ensure that
For ourselves.
for ourselves, that we are behaving in honor in such a way that we do not cause harm to another. It's a very, very different concept, but it really is what that's the bedrock of what sovereignty is. It's yes, being true to yourself, it's standing on your own sovereignty and authority as a living man or woman, but it's also recognizing that in honor, we cannot do harm to another. And we also need to hold each other accountable for when someone steps over the line and causes harm. And so all of that has really been lost in the jurisdiction that we're dealing with now, this running amok government with all of its rules and regulations that are all fear-based, by the way, because that's a lower consciousness.
Right.
Fear is what keeps people in control when they are not sovereign.
Yeah, so in essence, right, what has been done to us over time is taken us from divine beings. Now this concept is much older than 1871. This
Absolutely.
concept is thousands of years old. But the idea that as divine sovereign beings, we have over the course of thousands of years
Thousands of
been
years.
stripped of our divinity and our rights, been enslaved and been oppressed and forced further and further and further down the rung to the point where they can say, let them eat bugs
Right.
and own nothing. This is where they're going before they try to do another reset and wipe us of our memories and wipe us of all of everything. So this progression is something that is being halted by the people because people are waking up. Consciousness is getting to that point where people are waking up. They're recognizing because you can't hold down divinity, right? You we start to remember because we are that amazing. We begin to remember who we are, what we're
Mhm.
capable of, that something doesn't quite smell right here. And so we are coming together, and it behooves all of us to come together locally to
Yes.
connect with one another, to learn about what's happened, and to learn about the difference between being a corporate US citizen and being an American on land and soil. It's a significant difference in terms of your ability to connect with your own divinity and live as a sovereign free being who has a right to live in love and has a right not to be enslaved,
Right.
and that every human has this right.
Mhm.
All beings in, on, and around the planet have this right because we're divinely created.
Yes.
So, um, let's cut this off for now. I know we were going to get into power of attorney, but we can make another video specifically about power of attorney and how all of this flows into now that you know,
Mhm.
what do you do? How do you begin to take back your power and your own authority?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Thanks,
All
Ken.
right. Thanks, Ingrid.